Welcome to my Nomad fuel tank review. This is part two. Part one right up here is going to be the installation. Since installing it, I've put about 1,000 miles on the bike. I did the Utah BDR, and that included a lot of road miles from Idaho back down into Colorado. So I've used the tank quite a bit, and I'm hoping I'm going to answer any questions you guys might have. Again, if I don't, hit me up and ask away. Let's start off with the obvious. Do I like it? And the answer is a resounding yes, absolutely. 5 gallons is a lot of fuel, but you're really only talking an extra 12 pounds over a 3-gallon tank. So it's not a lot. Everybody likes to throw that number out there. That's 30 pounds of fuel and 7 pounds of tank and blah, 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 blah. But it's really only 13 pounds more than you're carrying now. And again, you're carrying it where you should be carrying the weight, not back here where you should not be carrying the weight. The other point I want to make about this tank is that a lot of that excess, those extra 2 gallons of fuel, are actually carried way down here low in the wings. And when you actually start getting down low and you're down here to those last 2 gallons, the bike feels just as nimble as ever. It's actually very light from here up, right? Where the IMS tank, your last 2 gallons are still up here. This carries its last 2 down low. So just something to keep in the back of your head is that you don't have to ride with 5 gallons of fuel. Now, that brings up the next question everybody's going to have. How exactly do you get to these last 2 gallons? This is what I found. I put 1 gallon of gas in it. I rode around. That first gallon went out real easy, right? So out of the 4 liters that were in it, 2 liters were not a thing. Somewhere along the highway, my bike started cutting out, and that would have been with the last 2 liters. I rolled the throttle on. The gas went back into the little collection area, let's call it that. There's a little divot down there. And then I made it about another 3 miles until the bike started to cut out again. I rolled the throttle on again, and then I got about 2 miles. And that's when this happened. Problem. If it completely dies, now what? And it died in the absolute worst possible spot it could fucking die in. Absolute worst spot ever. But it died. Okay. I'm going to try an experiment here once I get out of this curve. Like I said, the absolute worst spot I could die in.
You okay?
Yep, I'm good. Thank you. All right, so here's my experiment. So if I ride it up a hill and then splash gas, is it enough to get me home? Oh, it started. Look at that. Let's see if I can... So as you can see, it can be kind of tricky when you're down to those last 2 liters, that last half gallon. You've got to kind of plan ahead. Now, I did manage to get another 3 miles before it cut out again, and I had to ride it up a small embankment and pull it back and hit the brakes hard to slosh the fuel back up in there. And then I think the next time it stopped was another 2 or 3 miles. And at that point, I was done messing around with it. By that time, I had all but the last liter of gas. And that's when I stopped here on the highway. I put another 2 liters of gas in, and that got me to the gas station without any problem. All right, so in theory, there should be about 2 liters of gas in there. All right, so there's half a gallon in there, give or take. All right, so there's 1 gallon. And that, now it's still not covered the fuel pump. Okay, there's 1.5 gallons. Now it's still not covered. I mean, it's at the fuel pump. It's not covering it. All right, that should be 2 gallons in there. All right, now we're getting somewhere. Now looks like it's to the top of the fuel pump. Okay, that's 2.5 gallons, so that's half full, right? Now it's just covering the top of the fuel pump. So at that point, I would expect the light to go out. So let's fill this the rest of the way up. It should take 4.5 gallons. I think that's pretty wild that at 2.5 gallons, the fuel level, like compared to the rest of the bike, is still below the seat. All right, well, that's pretty close. I could probably squeeze a little bit more in there. I don't want to. So that should be 5-ish gallons. So that's what I found is the last 2 liters of gas, the last half gallon that sits way down here, you've got to be aware of, and you've got to have the wherewithal to roll the throttle on as soon as you feel it start to stutter. While I was riding it, I think the lowest I let the tank get to was about 2 gallons off-road, and I never had any issues whatsoever. The gas managed to splash and whatnot its way up in there that you never knew that the gas was actually being held down here. So off-road, it did just fine. Off-road, the only thing that I did notice was, and I think it has to do with this gas cap was leaking fuel. And I got to figure out why that was. It wasn't leaking, it was like splashing out. It wasn't a big deal. But I hope that answers your question. How do you get to that last little bit of gas? And I can imagine, I could see it clearly that if you were down to that last liter and you needed it, that if you found a hill like the one behind me and actually rode, or if you're really good at riding high wheelies, remember, this is gas tank all the way back to here, right? These wings are actually hollow, and these wings are level with where the fuel pump is. So anything that gets in here is actually going to get siphoned into the gas pump. So you don't have to splash gas up any higher than right about here on this level, right? So a good wheelie, or if you stopped and ramped it up, you get all that gas in there, and then you'd get whatever 1 liter of gas would get you, whether that's 10 miles or whatever. Because remember, at the bottom, if it's bouncy, it starts starving the fuel pump as the gas sloshes around. Even on the IMS tank does the same thing. The third question I know I'm going to get from a lot of people is, or maybe it'll be a comment, snide comment. But John, you got a black tank. How do you know how much gas you have in it? A, nobody knows how much gas they have in their tank unless they have a clear tank. And not everybody has a clear tank. B, even when I was riding with the black IMS tank, I always kept an eye on my gas gauge. I'm going to do a separate video on that here to follow. There's 2 ways, 2 really good ways to track how much gas is in your tank. The first is the way most people do. They track their mileage, right? And you know that your bike averages whatever the mileage is. On this, what I found is on the highway, trying to do 80, anything over 65, 70 with 50 pounds of weight and me, all right, this is not a sport bike. It was not meant to slice through the air. I get around 40 miles per gallon, maybe a little bit less. So what I have to do is 5 gallons of gas, right, times 40, minus the half gallon, blah, 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 and do the math. But I have to keep track of my miles per gallon I'm burning through, because when I'm cruising and I'm off-road and I'm doing 30, 40 miles an hour, that number comes up to 45 or 48 with the Vortex on. So now I have to calculate between those two things. And I'm really no good at math. If you know me, you know I'm no good at math. So here's the second method that I recommend all y'all look into. When you scroll through your menu options on your dash, you have 3 different trip meters. Actually, you have 2 trip meters, A and B. Each one has 3 things. It has the miles on that trip, it has your average miles per gallon on that trip, and the last one is how many gallons you've burned through since you reset your trip. Let me say that again. I put 5 gallons in, I reset my trip, and that little meter will use the flow meter to actually calculate how much gas I've gone through. There's no math. You look at the number. When it says 4.5, you've burned through 4.5 gallons, and you better start looking for a gas station with this tank. Okay, 4th question you guys may or may not have, I don't know, are the ergonomics on the bike any different? And they are a little bit. This tank flares out, so when I'm sitting on the bike, if you have longer legs, you may notice it more. Shorter legs, you may notice it less. But when I'm sitting on the bike, my knees find the bulge of the tank right here where they didn't before. Before it was a little flatter right there. If I scooch back a little bit, right, I can still feel the tank is fatter here, but not by that much. And when I'm riding, you don't notice it whatsoever. It doesn't block your view. It only sticks out a little bit more than the IMS tank and the shrouds. So it's a little wider, but it's not a lot wider. If whatever you're going through, if 2 inches on either side are gonna make a difference, a 450 might not be the right bike for you for wherever you are. You might wanna think about getting a smaller, skinnier bike. In 1,000 miles, I think I've dropped it 3 times. I got off route on the Utah BDR and went through a closed section that had been closed because of mudslides. The mud was gone, it just left the rocks behind. And I didn't video any of it. I was crushing everything on this bike. It was amazing. I was dodging, I was doing hard enduro, I was the man. And then I decided to video it. So here's a video. And before you laugh at me, I got my front tire over that rock, and then my back tire caught that big rock, and that's what stalled me and tipped me over. And I look back at this video and I'm like, it looks like there's like a half a mile distance between me and the camera. I am right up at the camera at this point. That is super wide view. I am probably 3 feet from the camera. The camera's in a tree, so I had to get my ass end over that rock and make a hard right. So I was going too slow. Anyways, enough with the excuses, John. You crashed, we know. We don't care. We love you anyways, right? So I crashed and I tipped over. And in my defense, I was very angry about it because the camera was running. So what did John do? John did the classic John and tipped the bike over the other direction. And I'm going to leave that in for your entertainment. My point being is that it actually fell on the tank, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with the tank whatsoever. Both sides took the hit. It didn't mess anything up. The tank just acted as a big bumper. I did have a really hard crash where I touched the front brake a little too hard, lost the front end completely, went over the handlebars, and came down on this side of the tank. And I'll show it to you. What happened was the tank, because it hit so low, shifted and the radiator guard actually bent. Nothing stopped working, everything worked fine, but it did bend, and I did end up having to grab a big rock and kind of bash it back straight. I'm going to show you what I did here. What I did was added 2 very large steel fender washers to just reinforce that area until I can get a new radiator guard from Nomad. Oh, and while I'm pointing at the tank, if you're wondering, these are DeCal Works decals. They're made for a standard shroud, the left and right radiator shroud. I just cut the ends off and pasted it over top to, you know, kind of give the bike a little flair. Anyways, for question number 5 might be, John, you said you had some issues with the installation, and I did, because this tank fits kind of different. It's really well engineered. I like how everything gets hooked on, but I also have Scott steering damper, and the pin right here sticks out. And even with the IMS tank, you kind of got to slide it underneath. And this tank in the back, because it has wings, completely surrounds your ECU, sort of. So your ECU has to, all the wiring and stuff has to be very neat and tucked up underneath the ECU for the tank to go on. And I didn't realize that until I'd spent a little while swearing at the tank and at Nomad tank and at Mick in particular. But once I figured out that I just had to make it neater and keep the wires tucked all completely underneath the ECU, it went right on. And after that, I didn't have a problem. And I felt horrible for saying all the horrible things I said, and I take them all back. Another thing that makes living with this tank easier is when you do go to take it off. I think I even said you can actually reach up under, I can't from this side because there's all the wirings here, but you can reach up underneath and just loosen the tank, and you can disconnect everything without having to pull the tank up and tip it. Let's see, question number, I forget, what question are we up to now? I don't know, 5, 6? I have not had any leaks from the fuel pump. I know people had issues with the IMS tank, and I think that was more because the way they did it was the fuel pump would squeeze the O-ring between the tank and the pump, where this has more of a traditional O-ring fit. The O-ring fits around the outside of the fuel pump, and that whole assembly slides into the tank. I haven't had a leak, but now I didn't have any leaks with my IMS tank either. And then maybe the last question you might have is, do I need to do anything to my suspension because so much of the weight is front? And my answer for my riding, for my size and how I ride is no. That the suspension, the front forks on your CRF450L are built to take up to a 220 pound rider. I'm 180, this adds another 3 gallons, which is 18 pounds. So now I'm up to 198. I'm still under 200 pounds. So I'm still under what this bike is supposed to be able to handle. The air quotes up there, see those? I rode her out here over those rough roads. It was 25 miles, so I emptied half a gallon. So I was still riding around with 4.5 gallons of gas. And I gotta tell you, I didn't notice the weight. I didn't notice really much of any change, except for my knees now hit the tank a little bit harder because the tank's a little wider. I didn't change anything on the suspension. I didn't change anything at all, really. I just rode out here, and she rode as amazing as she always rides. I really like it. I have no complaints. You guys tell me what you think. Good, bad, the ugly. Let me know what you think of how it looks. I can tell you the way it performs. So far it performs great. I have, again, no complaints. So let me know what you guys think. Are you the kind of person who needs to carry 5 gallons of fuel? Honestly, most of us on dirt bikes aren't, and I get that, that's fine. But a couple of us, once in a while, right, we would push our luck out to the 150-mile mark, or even the 200-mile mark. Hit me up in the comments, let's talk about this. And remember, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I think it actually looks pretty badass myself. But that's just me. I think it looks badass. I think it works great. I think Nomad's got a pretty good product on their hand, with a few caveats. But anyways, you know how this works. Talk to me down in the comments. You know I get back to everybody if I can. I really make a point to post these videos initially when I'm around and I can actually talk to people. And I will most definitely be around when I post this, because I really want to hear what everybody has to say. And in the meantime, guys, gals, thank you so much for tuning in and watching me work on my motorcycle.